I want to see that we're recording, but I am assuming we are. So welcome, everyone. I want to say first, hello and welcome to our November webinar for the Digital Learning and Leadership community. I'm Louisa Sullivan. You're not able to see me today, but I'm super excited to present our presenter today, Chris Sperry from Project Look Sharp. And happy Media Literacy Week for all of those that are here today and having this as part of their Media Literacy Week kind of professional development and growth. We're super excited to have you all here. Please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know what you're doing, if anything, for Media Literacy Week and how you're kind of kicking it off, how you hope to be inspired this week. I'm super excited to get started, but before I do, we're gonna have a couple housekeeping, just go over a couple housekeeping-ish things. Chris, would you go ahead and change the slide for me, because I'm unable to do that right now.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Although I'm seeing a blank screen.
I am too.
I mean, keep going?
Yeah, you know what, I think it's just gonna take a second.
Okay.
Well, maybe we can have edWeb help us out there. But for all of those who haven't seen the new edWeb platform, this is it, and I love it. It's fantastic. There are a couple of things that are new to it, including the questions. We want to make sure to capture all of your questions throughout the presentation. So go ahead and click on the question mark above Chris's head at the top of your screen, so we can capture those and and make sure that he answers all of them at the end of the presentation. If you want to chat, make sure you click on the attendee chat so you can connect with your fellow participants and tell us a little bit about yourself, and Chris will be posing some questions throughout for you all, so you want to put your answers in that chat. If you want to view a larger slide of the screen, you can click on the full screen image at the upper right hand of your screen. If you do that, make sure the chat doesn't hide any of the presentation, and you can make just so you can adjust that chat too if you want to. If you're having any audio issues, you can switch the phone by clicking the telephone icon. And then if you're tweeting out, use hashtag edWebinar. I'm seeing.
Give me to advance? Yep.
It's just taking a second to advance. Here we go. If you haven't already, make sure you join the Digital Learning and Leadership community at edweb.net/commonsense. In addition to being able to see all of the archived webinars, including Chris's with the PDF version of these slides and links to all the resources he's mentioning today, you'll be able to continue to connect with each other. Also, which is new to edWeb, if you haven't already, from your homepage, you'll be able to access all of your CE certificates. And I'm trying to go to the next slide. Let's see if I can do that. Chris, can you go to the next slide? Sorry, there we go. We're just a little slow today. Speaking of CE certificates, your CE certificate, if you're viewing live, will be emailed to you the next business day after this webinar. If you are watching the recording, you want to make sure to take the CE quiz, and your certificate will be emailed to you. And without further ado, I do want to introduce Chris. We're super excited to have him here, kicking off our Media Literacy Week. He is the Director of Curriculum and Staff Development from Project Look Sharp. If you haven't gone on, I will share that link. Please check out all those wonderful resources. Chris has taught secondary social studies and media studies. He is the co-author of numerous curriculum kits that integrate media decoding and critical thinking into the curriculum. This includes the Media Construction Series on War, Presidential Campaigns, the Middle East, Soviet History, Africa, Economics, and Global Warming. He is the recipient of the 2005 National PTA and Cable Leaders in Learning Award for Media Literacy and the 2008 National Council for the Social Studies James M. Becker Award for Global Leaders. We are super excited to have him here today to present fantastic resources for you all around media literacy and critical thinking. And Chris, I will let you take it away. And again, everyone, please make sure you ask your questions. I'll come on at the end for Chris to answer them. Thank you so much.
Luisha, thanks so much. Thanks, Regina, for all that you're doing. Thanks, Common Sense, for just the resources and the advocacy and the tremendous work that you're doing. So I'm going to jump right into it in the precious time that we have with this diverse group of educators. Today's focus is integrating media literacy and critical thinking across the curriculum. And I know there are a bunch of you who are from different contexts. I think this is primarily a K-12 orientation, totally works for colleges and other contexts. So hopefully you can apply it to whatever context you're in. And I am speaking predominantly as a classroom teacher and for Project Look Sharp. We're a mission-driven organization created over 20 years, founded by Professor Cindy Scheid, who's still our executive director, with the purpose of supporting teachers to integrate media literacy across the curriculum. So everything that you're seeing has come through teachers like you asking us for support and help, and us working with educators to try to respond to those requests. So we're mission-driven. Almost everything you're going to see is totally free. I'll mention the one thing that costs any money. So please use our website, give us feedback as much as you can. So Regina, we're going to start with the first poll to set the stage. How many hours per day on average do you think that U.S. teens spend with media not school related? So this isn't anything that they're doing in school, and this is not stuff they're doing for school. Give us a guess of how many hours a day. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. What do you think? And nobody's hitting 0 or 1, which makes some sense. And we're tracking hard between 5 and 7 hours a day. Very few saying 3, some saying 9. And we're getting close. One person said 1, and of course it varies for students in different contexts. But in fact, I'm about to close the poll. We have about half saying, oh no, we have 37, but about a third saying 5 hours, a third saying 7 hours, about a fifth saying 9 hours, a little less than 10% saying 3 hours. So I think I will close the poll. And Regina, do they get to see the poll posted? Those final ones? Let me tell you that in fact, according to Common Sense Media's survey in 2015, and really appreciate you guys doing that. In fact, the average number of hours per day for U.S. teens spending with media, not school-related, not in school, is 9, and actually over 9 hours a day. And if you count the amount of hours they're spending engaged with media when they're multitasking, it's closer to 12 hours. So they are multitasking for multiple hours. Heavy users is over 16 hours. Higher in lower SES groups. Students of color tend to be higher users there as well. So lots of variables. Go on to the Common Sense census to find out about that. But in the words of the Kaiser Family Foundation study 2 years earlier, anything that takes up that much space in the lives of our children deserves our attention. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is 9 hours a day on average of media use for our students. So let's start with the definition of media. From Project Look Sharp and the National Association for Media Literacy Education, media are messages conveyed through visuals, through language, through sound. So we're less interested actually in the technology than in the messages that are communicated via that technology. We're particularly interested in mass-produced media, not so much the individual post-it that I draw on and pass to the person next to me, but the media that gets communicated through some form of technology to a mass audience. And importantly, the producer of the message is not in the same place. So I cannot interact directly with that person. So am I mediated today? I'd say so, but we can actually interact in chat. So social media and new media forms are messing up this definition. But in general, the idea that media is messages, it's mass produced, and the person who originated the message is not present. So we live in a mediated world. And I want you to type in what media forms you have experienced today. So if you can put into the chat, what are some of the media forms you have experienced today? So I'll pause while people do some typing in. We've got television, newspaper, Facebook, internet, games, Fast and Furious, podcasts, Snapchats, emails, TV, student information systems, Snapchat, radio, Twitter, emails, texting. So a lot, Instagram, a lot of social media in this group, actually higher than a lot of the teachers that I work with. And even some of the students I work with, Periscope, great. Thank you. And people can go back and take a look at those. I'm not sure you're totally reflective of the population at large, but let me go to this list. In fact, with a lot of the teacher groups, I refer to the first thing that comes up is radio in terms of the first thing in the morning. Not exactly reflective of our teenage populations, although I interviewed a group of 10th grade students last week who were studying the news, and they said radio was their favorite because they were less distracted when they listened on the radio. So not necessarily the one they use the most. Television is still the largest use in terms of number of hours of students, 4 hours a day for the average American teenager. We forget about television as a major media form. Newspapers, magazines, again, both in traditional print form and now in online form, still around. Social media growing dramatically, but isn't necessarily either the most favorite or the highest use for students. Advertising in all of its forms tends to be the media that we often forget because it is so ubiquitous and it is everywhere, and everything that we do typically is advertising as a form of media and those messages that come through. And then, of course, videos, DVD, films, computers, video games. Recorded music is another huge one for young people in particular, over 2 hours of recorded music a day. So a dramatically important media form, communicating messages. And then I want to suggest for the librarians and teachers and others, another important school-based media form, in home, that's still significant, that's not on this list, that we often don't think about as media, and that is books. So there are traditional media forms not to be forgotten. We think about decoding media, it's important to recognize that media is all around us and has been for a long time. Cave paintings fit that definition of media. Maps, money, communicating messages and ideas. And as we help students to decode, to analyze, and to evaluate, and to produce media, we need to think beyond media just being either social media or television and contemporary media. But it puts in a broader context the concept of literacy in media. The purpose of media literacy education from the National Association for Media Literacy Education to help individuals of all ages develop the habits, inquiry, and the skills of expression to be critical thinkers, effective communicators, and active citizens in today's world. So this work is fundamentally about citizenship. It's about empowerment. It's about literacy, it's about learning, it's about education, and it's about being human beings. The words of Paulo Freire, it's about the praxis of action and reflection that helps us to be fully human. And from our definition, and I would call this as the best reflection of Project Lookshop's definition, media literacy is a process as opposed to a particular knowledge. It has knowledge in it, as well as analysis and evaluation and creation, but it is a process that at its heart has inquiry and reflection, that requires access, that leads to action, but is a process of inquiry reflection using knowledge, analysis, evaluation, and creation. I'll jump into one of the first frameworks that I'm going to start with today, and this is from the National Association for Media Literacy Education, and all the links are in the archived PDF PowerPoint. But this is the key concepts of media analysis, been worked out over many decades of scholarship for media literacy education. And we'll spend a little bit of time with these today. All media messages are constructed. And we may take that for granted as adults, but I bet there are areas where we don't think about that. We don't think about the constructed nature of someone's outfit that they're wearing, or the design of a car or architecture. But our young people often are very oblivious. At kindergarten, it's rare that they recognize the constructed nature of advertising. They can be taught that advertisements are intended by producers of toys, for instance, to get young people to bug their parents to buy a particular toy and understand the constructed nature of ads, but they don't necessarily understand that without being taught. Similarly, when I do news work with 10th grade students in high school, they tend to see the news as something that's just out there that people go and find, as opposed to someone constructs the news, or history textbooks or science textbooks. It's somehow that's just the facts that someone finds and puts together in an unbiased and objective way. And from a media literacy perspective, no. There's choices made all the time, but that history, even that science, certainly those advertisements, they're all constructed. Secondly, as a key concept, that each medium have different characteristics, different strengths, a unique language of construction. And of course, Marshall McLuhan taught us this in the 60s in talking about the medium as the massage or the message, that the medium itself communicates ideas, values, has its own biases. And we're in a transition time from the predominantly visual medium of television, which took over from radio. There's a reason why we had a president with a deep voice who used radio, who was in a wheelchair, who might not have got elected in a television age, where we had a president, Ronald Reagan, still very popular to this day. Even though people disagree with his policies, they thought he was a great president, and he was a master. And of course, his training was in film and in television. And today we have a president who has mastered to a great extent and is pioneering the use of social media. So these different media forms have different qualities, different languages, different characteristics, and it's really important for our students to understand and reflect on, whether it's for their own production or for how they understand, represent the biases, so to speak, and the perspectives and the orientations of different media forms. Media messages are produced for particular purposes, and this is at the core of what we must teach young people to continually question. Why was this produced? Who produced this? What was their intent? And the next key concept, what are the messages? What are the values? What are the points of view embedded in these different media messages? You can obviously apply all of this to news specifically and fake news, but in fact, we think in order for this to be truly integrated into our culture, these concepts need to be integrated across the grade levels, adult education as well, in different roles, in different subject areas, from health and language arts to social studies and science and math, all different areas, these key concepts. What are the messages or the values of different graphic representations of factual information, for instance? Number 5, one of my favorite, in some ways, key concepts, different than the rest in the sense that it reminds us that not only are media messages constructed by producers to communicate certain messages and ideas, but each of us as consumers of media we construct our own understanding based on our own historical and cultural and geographic, and I could go on and on. But our different identities and our different perspectives mean that we interpret different media message, the same media message, in different ways. We can't forget that as we teach students to analyze and evaluate and produce media. And finally, that media messages influence our beliefs, our attitudes, our values, our behaviors, and certainly the democratic process. And I probably don't need to say a lot. We're living in a time where many of us are hyper aware all the time of the impact of media messages on democracy. So I'm going to jump into our classroom work and the work of Project Look Sharp to help teachers figure out how to integrate media literacy. And particularly, the focus today is going to be media analysis, to integrate media analysis throughout the curriculum. And they have to start with what they're teaching, what you're teaching, your core content skills. So I'm going to just give one simple example using two documents that was part of a lesson and activity created by fourth grade teachers. And they were teaching about the first contact between Native peoples and Europeans. And they kept coming across this painting by William Henry Powell from the 19th century in history books that often didn't have any kind of description, but it was just in there in the section about first contact between Native people and Europeans. And it was as if it's just an illustration, doesn't really matter. We don't need to have any information below about it. But I know that I, as a fourth grader, would have taken more about history from this image than I would from all the text that was surrounding, because I was a very visual kid. I thought I was a stupid kid because the words didn't work well for me. I was kind of dyslexic and had a hard time. But I picked up so much on the messages in the images. And it gave me a leg up as a filmmaker and then now as a teacher of literature, because I understand how to access message and meaning in multiple forms. So this is an example of a document, a text, that a fourth grade teacher might use to ask questions. A simple one might be, okay, you read last night in your homework about this man DeSoto and his discovery of the Mississippi. We'll come back to that idea of discovery. But which one do you think is DeSoto? And the students, even in fourth grade, will very quickly suggest the man in the center is DeSoto. You might ask why, but I might quickly go to this question. What's one adjective? And I'll ask you, you get to type it in now to the chat box. What's one adjective that this painting describes DeSoto as? What's one adjective to describe DeSoto here, such as regal, heroic, powerful, authoritative, proud, respected, confident, stately, important, regal, dominating, powerful, heroic, arrogant, leader? And you can think in terms of fourth grade language and perspective. Great. So those are a lot of the comments that students, a lot of the adjectives that students will come up with. And next would be critically to ask them for their evidence. And I might take one word. I'd take the word powerful. And once we get back to the image, to ask you to think about what evidence the students might come up with at fourth grade that DeSoto is shown as powerful in this image. So again, this is evidence-based analysis. And I'll just let you know, working with fourth graders for many years with this, they'll cue into body language very well, about the body language of Native people on the right-hand side and the man protecting himself, or the older man who's placing what looks like weapons and a pipe down onto the ground, or the body language of the women and their nakedness. And they'll talk about vulnerability if you probe around what are the message there of the women in terms of their body language, but also the body language of DeSoto and his seeming confidence. Someone said arrogance. And to probe down with students, what do you mean by arrogance or confidence? What makes him a leader? What makes him powerful? And then the idea of the framing of the canon, the men in the foreground, or the men in the background, the man looking up and in prayer, and what that might say about what they're doing there in DeSoto's power. Or the flags, what do they represent? And how might they represent the power of DeSoto? The white horse, literally the shape of the sky and the lines that draw you in. We could go on and on, but they will, fourth graders, decode very powerfully this sense of his power. Another question, once they begin to take this apart and see the constructed nature of this image, is what's the point of view or the perspective, fourth graders, about this? From whose point of view is this painting drawn? And very quickly they'll say either De Soto or the Europeans. And then as a teacher, you'd probe for information about why. What makes you say this is from the perspective of De Soto? And they will be able to explain how this represents a point of view of history. They'll talk about things like, well, he's moving through the Native American territories. He's moving to the right, and there's a pathway made for him, and the Native Americans are fearful and pulling back, and the Europeans have all the power and they're moving in. They will analyze and evaluate this construction. I'm going to go on now, and obviously it would take more than the time that we've done, to the next painting, the next document. But first, we might ask them to reflect on the title, Discovery of the Mississippi by De Soto, and what that says about point of view and perspective. You'll have to decide whether your fourth graders are ready and able to do that. But in Ithaca, they certainly jump right into that concept and idea. Here's the next document that we would have students analyze and evaluate. And we might go right to that question of perspective and point of view. What's the perspective and the point of view here? And students will very quickly talk about, this is from inside the native people's home looking out. And that the Europeans, if you probe around how they're represented, are shadowed and dark. They don't have faces. They seem like outsiders. They seem scary. They're coming from the sky. There's red that represents blood. There's a cross in the background. And inside the home, their family has been disrupted. The bowl is turned over. They're comforting each other. They will talk very articulately about the perspective and the point of view of first contact here. And if asked, they will provide evidence from the document for doing that work. So two, I won't say simple, complex, rich, beautiful texts for students to take apart and evaluate, whether they are special education students, English as a second language, students who are bored with traditional print or also access print well. They can all engage around this kind of complex decoding. And if you feel that it is appropriate, you might choose to introduce the title for this one, The Last Supper by Jonathan Warnday. And of course, a different context in time. With older students, I might talk about the historical context of 1855 versus 1991, and certainly the meanings of those two. So you want to choose your questions and where to probe based on your students, but always based on your goals. Learning about first contact and the knowledge that comes with that, their applying of their knowledge of what they read the night before about De Soto, their understanding of cultural and historical perspective and point of view, quite a complex idea for fourth graders, yet accessible through this media literacy orientation. Developing conclusions and providing evidence from a document is in all the tests they're going to be doing. And working effectively with all students, core to so many of our teachers, that this needs to be a high level, rigorous, but accessible to all my students. But I want to take a minute to think about the three key concepts, or the six key concepts, and how they apply to this work and the decoding of these documents. All messages are constructed. Students are learning to deconstruct and see the ways in which William Henry Powell's painting was constructed to communicate certain messages and ideas and values and a point of view. To recognize that media messages are produced for particular purposes. And I haven't told you, but this was commissioned by the US Congress in 1855, and it hangs in the rotunda of the Capitol building. What are the messages about history in that document? The picture I showed you was actually an excerpt from that that was in the history textbooks, because the history textbooks chose not to have the full painting. I wonder if it's because there's a cross in the right-hand side of this picture, and that was cropped out because there were different purposes in the history textbooks than there would be in 1855, and different meaning in 1855. If I was working with a high school class in history, I might ask, what's the historical context of 1855 that would cause Congress to choose this as the image, such as the Indian Wars and what was going on? Or what's the context of the frame and what does that mean? But you're choosing your questions based on your audience and your goals and your objectives. But we shouldn't lose track of the fact that not all our students will see this in the same way. When we did this decoding once, and there was a Vietnamese student on the group and asked This was a college student and asked her, which one's DeSoto? She said, it must be the man in the back. He said, well, actually, no. Why him? Well, he's leading and he's looking off and he's holding his head up. No, it's actually not him. Well, it must be the guy looking up to God and praying. He said, well, actually, it's the man on the horse. And she was aghast. The Vietnamese student said, how could that be? You don't lead from the front. That's crazy. And besides, he's got feathers in his head. He's a kind of a romantic character. And he's riding a white horse. That doesn't make any sense. We forget how much information there is in our cultural contexts that isn't just a given, but comes from those contexts. We all see messages through those lenses. This is the other core document I want you to walk away with today and share with your teachers and your colleagues. And this is the kinds of questions you can ask, and equally, if not more important, the kinds of categories you can ask about. And we'll come back to this in a minute. The process that I'm going to illustrate and show a classroom example from, we call constructivist media decoding. And on the Project Look Sharp website, you will see on the right-hand side videos about Project Look Sharp. If you click on that, one of the options is media decoding examples. And we're going to show you one example right now. It's a 5-minute video of me leading a group of high school students who I'd worked with through that year. So they have background in Middle Eastern politics. And I'm going to ask you just think about what you see in this 5-minute example of media decoding, what my objectives might be, and why this might be a useful process. So if you can run, Regina, the video, that would be great. So now we are looking at maps of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Maps tend to be fact or opinion?
Opinion.
Opinion, both. I want to come back to that question after we've looked at a couple of different maps. This is a map from 1945. The title is Land Ownership in Palestine, 1945. I'm not going to tell you if there's a Palestinian map or an Israeli map, but I'm going to show you two maps. One came from a Palestinian website, one came from an Israeli website. This is land ownership in 1945, and as you can see here, the blue in the key, the blue shows Israeli land ownership in different regions of Palestine and what became Israel in 1945. The green is Arab land ownership at that time, and the yellow is public and or other land ownership. What are the primary messages given in this map, Bernard, about 1945 and Palestine and land ownership?
Well, the Arabs control pretty much the majority in all different areas.
Yeah. What's the message about the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, according to this map?
That it's not justified, it's not fair.
It's not fair, it's not justified. You put the hands, what did you mean?
I put the thumbs down because, well, yeah, exactly what Carmen said. It's not justified because the Jewish population doesn't own as a significant amount of land as the Arab state.
Now, is that an opinion or a fact? It wasn't justified.
It's an opinion.
That's an opinion. But that land ownership chart, is that fact or opinion?
It's fact.
Yeah, it's fact. I mean, you could dispute that fact, and it is disputed actually. But that's fact. So this map is based on fact. So is this an objective map?
No,
Why not?
I still don't think so.
Why? It's facts. It's just straightforward facts.
But
Even facts can be modified.
yeah,
Because
John?
it's pretty much only giving like Palestinian side because it's pretty much just showing that the Arabs owned more land in that area, but like that's like an argument for the Palestinian side, and there's no
Yeah.
pro is like anything.
So it's just presenting facts from one perspective.
Yeah.
yeah.
And pointing, so it is facts.
Assuming this is an Arab,
Assuming you were right, this is a
Palestinian map.
Palestinian. Okay. I'm going to now move us on to a second map. Take a look at this. The title of this map is The Arab Invasion, 1948. I want you to take a minute, look at the map, read the key, think about the facts, and Do you think this is from an Israeli website or a Palestinian
Israeli.
website? Israeli website.
Israeli.
And what's the major point, the walk away? Gabe, what do you think is the main idea behind this map? What's communicated?
I think the Israelis are trying to show that they were attacked first and that they were kind of surrounded.
Great. Anybody else? Other messages here? Carmen.
Well, for me, it just reminds me of a common theme that's been apparent through the history of Israel, and kind of that whole topic is that the Jewish people are victimized, that this is their land and it's being taken away from them or in some way invaded by other people, and that the idea that they don't belong there is just completely invalid and false, because if you look at the map, it kind of looks like everything is swarming towards the blue, which is the land that is held by Israel on the eve of the Arab invasion. So,
excellent. Rosie.
Well, you can see in the key it says there are Arab cities and Jewish cities, and
Yes.
Jerusalem is shown as a Jewish city.
Really interesting. Is that significant?
yeah.
Yeah.
Considering the
John?
last map, that area around Jerusalem said that there was only like a 2% Jewish population there. So
Very good. Very good. So is one of these two maps wrong?
No.
No, why not?
because they both have facts.
They both have facts backing them up in terms of.
And I also, even if we decided they were opinion maps, opinions can't necessarily be wrong.
So maps are biased? Okay, back to the PowerPoint. Regina, if you can take us back to the PowerPoint, that would be great. Terrific. Thank you. What were my objectives in this 5-minute video? We've already started to have that chat, but I'm particularly clearly decoding media as a part of it. But what were the other objectives that I was after as a teacher in that 5-minute activity? What was I trying to teach besides media decoding? Because I think if we just focus on the media literacy, it's not going to get integrated. And I had other very clear objectives. What are their objectives? Maps have bias. Good. Understanding perspective and point of view. These are coming right out of the standards, the old ones as well as the new C3 social studies standards. Love of questioning. I love that. Habitual enjoyment, wanting to question and analyze. Fact versus opinion. So, Lisa, really important. You know, all social studies teachers want to teach science as well, you know, about fact versus opinion. Drawing quiet students into the conversation. When I asked Gabe, what did you have to say? Cultural context of facts, really interesting. Comparing and contrast. I bet an elementary educator in there, such a critical one. No one's mentioned, this is so interesting, but in fact, I had very clear content objectives. I wanted them to apply knowledge about Israel and Palestine. In fact, I've used this as an assessment of their ability to distinguish between Israeli and Palestinian perspectives so that it could apply knowledge. And as a social studies or a history teacher, science teacher, you know, content's important to us. The media literacy approach and the constructivist media decoding is a way of applying that knowledge, having students apply that knowledge, be the workers to analyze and evaluate. So multiple objectives, and I'm getting at those objectives through questions. And while you'll find some of the specific questions I asked, this is factor opinion, I think what you'll find here is that, and we have links to this document in the PowerPoint, you can get this from our website, Key Questions to Ask When Analyzing Media Messages, is that I mostly covered many of these categories, not with the exact questions here, but with questions specific to this document that really got at interpretation and effects, credibility, context, content, purpose, authorship. So you're not following a script, you're not necessarily asking specifically, but you're integrating into your core content as an educator these kinds of continual questions. Develop that, I forget who said, the kind of habits and love of inquiry and questioning. We call this constructivist media decoding. Constructivist because it assumes that we construct our understanding of the world in interactions with others. From a developmental perspective, when students were listening to each other's analysis, they were asked to have to defend their own and to explain. Students who were just at the point of being able to understand these deeper concepts are way more likely to get it from listening to their peers than from listening to me talk and lecture to them. They're more likely to construct a more complex understanding of the world through interactions with their peers. It's inquiry-based around questions, and ultimately, we hope students are the ones asking those questions. This is an early activity in the sense of modeling for students the kinds of questions that we ultimately want them to be asking. It is a literacy process fundamentally about learning to read and to decode the world. It is a collective reading process where they learn from each other, they apply their knowledge, and they're always interpreting and evaluating rich and diverse media documents of all different types. And the feedback from teachers is that it engages students, particularly those who are often disengaged with traditional print forms of media. It connects to the skills they need in their lives, ties to the new standards. It's particularly good for controversial issues. And I showed you a couple of challenging documents around very controversial issues, but the students did the analysis, not me providing my own analysis, although I chose the documents. If you go onto our website under media literacy testimonies, you could hear students talking, high school students, about why they think this is so critical to be doing in their classes. So a couple of guidelines, rules, if you want to. Start with your objectives. You might find a great document and then look for what your objectives could be. But really, you should be starting with maybe the thing that's hardest to teach, and then find exciting, rich, diverse media documents to teach about that issue that you've been struggling with, to choose your questions, and then plan how you will probe, when and where, to get at those objectives. Make it constructivist, listen to students, limit your tendency to talk, and mostly ask questions and probe, and add information when it's appropriate, and sometimes it's necessary to correct misinformation, to challenge a comment that can't go unchallenged by the teacher, but in general, you're mostly probing. So I'm going to, and I know I'm moving quickly, but I'm going to go through some of the resources at Project Look Sharp. Let's start with saying where they came from. When we did this work over 20 years ago, teachers said, look, I can do this in science and social studies, maths, but I need to have the right documents with background information. I don't have the time. You need to start publishing these cool projects that our teachers are making. And teacher education students and new students said, I also need help with what questions I should use and how do I lead a decoding. So on our website, you'll find kits and lessons and activities for integrating media decoding into social studies, and particularly in science, the content areas, ELA, other areas. Here's just one example. The kit on media construction of war. The rich media documents that we use are covers from Newsweek magazine, from during the Vietnam War, during the Gulf War in 1991, during the war in Afghanistan in 2001, and having students decode and apply their knowledge to not only understanding the history of that war through decoding editorial imagery and words, but also through comparing, in this case, the construction of war in the Vietnam War, in the Gulf War, and the war in Afghanistan. Document-based questions tied to core concepts and ideas will be modeled in any of our kits. You can take a look at these as examples. Key information that we provide, students may sometimes have that information. In this case, a 4-page background on the history of the Vietnam War that provides the information they need for the decoding. So we have 22 kits like this in all different subject areas with fundamentally about media documents, over 2,000 with questions. And we are engaging now our participants to help us create new kits. We call them collaborative activity projects or CAPS, particularly in the area of sustainability right now. So you want to collaborate with us on creating lessons, drop me a line. And these are just a couple of the kits and just a reminder of the kind of diversity of media documents that can be used. Media types. This is an elementary kit for Causes of the American Revolution. And here is a science kit, or science-oriented kit that uses obituaries, mission statements, book covers, test questions as media for students to reflect on credibility and accuracy and perspective and point of view, etc. Keep your Velcro buds active to look for media documents in your world that you can use and repurpose in class. All of these we apply the fair use document of, or fair use of copyright law to. And some other resources on our website, resources for finding original documents in social studies or science or English language arts on our website. These are all linked from the PDF. For tying to specific Common Core or C3 or next generation science standards, you can do that from our website to find activities that do that. A do-it-yourself activity guide for creating your own lessons that allow you to drill down on specific questions having to do with lesson conception or media documents or question design. Videos that we have demonstrating this being done at different grade levels, different teachers, et cetera, and we're putting more up all the time. Articles in science and social studies and other areas about media literacy integration, and media literacy handouts like the ones you saw here, access from our website. And here's the one plug that costs some money. We're starting online courses. This one's on facilitating challenging topics through media literacy. This will be a 6-week online course, and this is linked from the PDF as well. So I think I've only got about 10 minutes. I'll try to go quickly through these, but one of the greatest challenges is teaching our students to reflect on their own biases. And let me take a minute to just speak to the issue of critical thinking. It's valuing good reasoning, knowing what questions to ask, doing this consistently and having the motivation and the curiosity to question, but it's also questioning our own assumptions, recognizing that we carry our own biases and our thinking is always weakest when we are looking at information, idea, messages that reflect our own biases and points of view. We're often very strong critical thinkers when we're criticizing other beliefs that we disagree with. But when we're looking at information that reflects our point of view, our critical thinking is often weak. This recent study done by University of California, Riverside and Santa Clara professors Kahn and Boyer speaks powerfully to this issue. They studied young people's ability to evaluate basically fake news. And they disaggregated students with high level of political knowledge and low levels of political knowledge. And I'm going to go through this quickly. Sorry, I don't have time for the poll, but do you think that students were better able to identify political misinformation, fake news, if they knew a lot about politics or a little? And what the Kahn study showed, that in fact there was little difference. Students who had all that information about politics couldn't identify fake news and misinformation. Why? Because they took the information and they made it fit what they already knew about politics. We spend all this time as teachers saying if the kids only knew the truth about climate change or knew the factual information about this, they'd change their mind. But we have an amazing ability to seek out evidence that aligns with our pre-existing views. Perspectives that contradict our beliefs, we discount. We can evaluate arguments that align with our views as better and more accurate than opposing arguments. And the more political knowledge we have, the better we're able at doing this, the more confirmation bias we have. One of the ways to help students be better thinkers about this, their ability to access truth, 3 strategies that came through in their study. Having students justify their own opinions, what we just saw in those media literacy activities. 2, having students consider varied perspectives and points of view, what we were doing in both of those. And 3, having them reflect on their own thinking, how they interpret information differently by asking questions. I'm going to skip through this for a minute. Say questions about perspective, about technique, questions about credibility, and finally, questions about how their own views might influence and interpret their evaluation of different documents. This is all related to some exams, some testing work that we're doing at my school. So I went too quickly through that last one, so that we could get to at least a few questions. And I'll let Louisa jump in now with some questions.
Thank you so much, Chris. I know that you provided a lot of information for all participants, and as we posted all of these links, the slides will be available in our archived section in our community. So we do have a few questions that we want to make sure we get through. First one, when does new AASL standards come out? So
Don't know. Don't know.
That's something we can.
No, somebody else can post. Maybe somebody else knows that, and they can add that to the chat. Yeah, we can
do a little research and post either in the chat or make sure to post in the community to make sure that that is answered. This next question, this is a broader question that we'll try to kind of narrow it down. But what is critical thinking and perspective?
So I did put a definition that comes from Scheib and Rogo's book, The Teacher's Guide to Media Literacy. It'll be in the slides as a definition of what critical thinking is. I was using the term perspective interchangeably with point of view, and to some extent, I'm using the word bias in a similar way. I happen to believe that you can't create a history textbook that doesn't have a bias. I saw a headline once saying, bias found in history textbook. I happen to believe that there is always a bias, even if that bias is to get people to think from different points of view and perspectives. That's a certain bias, a certain orientation, a certain perspective and point of view that we're pushing. My greatest goal is to get my students to decode the world around them, to take it apart, including my classroom, when they see things like, you're being so biased. I love it. What's your evidence? What does that look like? Of course I'm being biased. When they take apart the curriculum, the very videos and textbooks we bring into the class, and they're analyzing and evaluating their currency and credibility and accuracy and perspective and point of view, that's when I think they are internalizing these qualities that you were writing about.
Great. What about this one's from, what about students as creators of media? Ideas and thoughts on that?
So that, as you see at the very bottom of this process, is absolutely central and core. I was hired in 1978 at my school, 79 at my school, to help students who had problems with reading and writing by creating film and video, starting a black and white darkroom for photography, to create media. Because like in my life, when you create media, you also typically figure out about the constructive nature of media. So we have a handout on key questions to ask when analyzing media messages. We have another one that you'll find on the website, key questions to ask when producing media messages. Who's my audience? What's my purpose? What am I going to leave out? What am I going to include? Who might be hurt by my message? Who might be impacted in different ways? So students as media creators are such an exciting part of this process. I modeled the media analysis part that I think can very easily be integrated across the curriculum in any grade level, in any subject area, perhaps more easily than the creation part, although that's getting easier and easier all the time.
I am absolutely going to point educators to that resource, Chris. I hadn't seen it before, so that is, I think that's so important in thinking about students and encouraging them to be creators of media right now.
It's a whole other set of webinars that we can do.
That's right. Yeah. Next question, how do you deal with the relativity of truth? Is there absolute truth?
Yeah, no, great question. And we're just finishing now a significant unit through the Facing History in Ourselves curriculum in a high school social studies, global studies, and English class on the Holocaust and human behavior. And we teach in part about some of these issues because it's very difficult for students to be relativist about the Holocaust, for instance. There's right and wrong, in there, and maybe even good and evil. Some to stay away from the language, but usable. But there are certainly perspectives to be understood from the Nazis and what happened in Germany and why this grew. So to be understanding of different perspectives, to analyze and evaluate them, to articulate them is not to be relativist. In fact, this work is about forcing students to have to take a stand and say what they believe. That's one of the powers of media production. What do I believe And why do I believe it? Even though I understand these different perspectives and different points of view, and I understand these different ways of understanding the world, I still need to make choices and decisions. And to put students in a position to struggle with that fundamental part of being human is what we do all the time as educators.
Wow, I think I just saw someone was joking, how can you answer that in 5 minutes? Well, you just impressed me in doing that very, very well, so thank you. And last question, how does media literacy help students with learning disabilities work critically on activities?
Great. I mean, you could talk about this as a classic form of differentiation, in terms of scaffolding, in terms of using different media forms in the classroom to give access. But what I really think of it as is in my own experience as a kid who felt really stupid because I had challenges and I had what would be called disabilities these days. And if I hadn't been a privileged white kid with a Super 8 camera who started making surfing films at 12 years old, I'm not sure I would have realized as a teenager that, I'm not dumb. I can get $500 by people coming and watching my films, even though I'm failing in school, because it's all print-based stuff. We need to help all of our kids recognize their capacity, recognize their own brilliance by creating pedagogies in the classroom that allow them to access their different abilities. And as we diversify our texts and our media forms, as we listen to kids' construction, as we have young people share their ideas and their points of view in a really authentic way with their peers, we'll find that brilliance in different forms and will enable our kids with learning disabilities to contribute in very meaningful and powerful ways.
Thank you so much, Chris. That we are out of time for today, but I want to thank you because I know that we are all walking away with some tools that educators can bring back to their schools and classrooms and resources that they can really dive into around this topic. So thank you so much for presenting for us today.
Thank you, Common Sense, Louisa, Regina. Appreciate so much. And we'll respond to a lot of the questions once we're off air. So thanks.
Yes, we'll continue the conversation in the community. If you haven't checked out Common Sense Education, please make sure you do. We're a nonprofit providing resources for educators around digital citizenship and learning. We work on the forefront of media and tech to make sure students, educators, and parents have the resources they need to succeed in a constantly changing world. So please connect with us if you aren't already. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, you want to make sure to get your continuing education certificate. It'll be emailed to you if you're viewing this live. If you're watching this as a recording, make sure to take the CE quiz to earn the certificate, and that will be emailed to you. And please join us for the next edWebinar. It's all about privacy. Thursday, December 7th, please mark your calendars, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.